Okay, um, in my last video, I went through John 16, 1 through 15, and I thought that for this particular situation, maybe the Leviticus 16 ritual was the father and the scapegoat was the son. But after some further thought and trying to put it together with the rest of John 16, um, I'm going to go back to what I had earlier. The Father is the author, John, and the Son is the book of John. And in some parts, you are the pages, verses, words, and characters of the book. Let's discuss my own personal experience. I, well, let's put it this way. My grandmother, when I was up to, well, born when I was up to when I was 10, 15, 20. My grandmother kind of tried to encourage people to read the Bible, and she was really focused on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the rather traditional core Christianity. My parents basically said, no, it's all silliness, and they said that um, essentially, basically, they said, you already know wrong from right. You don't need uh, to be the threatened by hell to believe that you should do good and right things. But then sometime when I was in college, I joined a Bible study group where they did pretty deep dive into Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And once I we had gotten through Matthew, Mark, and Luke and some of the other topics, I started to think my major criticisms of Christianity were based on some kind of misunderstanding. But then we got into John and Revelations, and I was pretty disturbed by what I read, and I was wondering if they were worshiping the devil. But here in verse 7, very truly I tell you, it is good that I am going away. Unless I go away, the advocate will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. So during this time, um, where I was just reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and some of the Old Testament, I was like looking at it and I was thinking my major criticisms of Christianity is based on a misunderstanding. Um, but then you get to this point where you're going, wait a second, what is John and Revelations about? And that's where you spend weeks, days, weeks, months, or years reading John's Gospel, trying to figure out what the hell. And finally, he comes back and says, I think I'm starting to get it. And you realize they're worshiping the scapegoat, whose name happens to be Barabbas. So the world is wrong about sin and righteousness, about and judgment. There's people that think they believe in um, Jesus, but they are mistaken because they do not believe in the scapegoat. In particular, they don't realize what John's Gospel is about. John's Gospel is not um, a a celebration of the acts of Jesus, but rather a confession of what Jesus does. And regarding some of those confessions, um, it is a question and many questions on what is okay, what sins should or should not be condemned. So a question Jesus never asks here is how can you believe me if you do not understand what I am saying? How can you believe in John's gospel if you do not understand what it is saying? And this is a common theme of John's gospel, that the disciples of Jesus don't know what he's saying. The disciples said to one another, "What does he mean by saying, 'In a little while you will see me no more, then after a little while you will see me'? And because I am going to the Father." They kept asking, "What does he mean by a little while? We don't understand what he's saying." Jesus says a bunch more things here, and then I wonder whether this is supposed to be sarcasm, because then Jesus' disciples said, "Now you are speaking clearly and without figures of speech. Now we can see you know all things. You do not even need to have anyone ask you questions." Um, this is not the sort of thing that you say to a teacher, not a not a good teacher. If you're talking to a teacher and you say, "Oh, we can see that you know all things and you do not even need to have anyone ask you questions," that is basically throwing up your hands type of style. So we can see you know all things and don't even need us to ask any questions. This kind of conveys a bit of exasperation that you should have at this point because of throughout John's gospel, whenever anybody does ask any question, he completely evades them. He never answers anything directly. So anyway, this might have switched to Barabbas. Barabbas went on to say, "In a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me." Barabbas is running off and coming back. At this time some of his disciples said to one another, "What does he mean saying, 'In a little while you will see me no more, and in a little while you will see me'? Because I am going to the Father." They kept asking, "What does he mean, 'a little while'? We don't understand what he's saying." Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this, so he said to them, "Are you asking one another what I meant when I said, 'In a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me'?" Boy, that's long. "Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices, but you will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. Truly, truly, I say to you that will weep and will lament you, but the world will rejoice. You will be grieved, but the grief of you to joy will turn. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. The woman, when she is giving birth, pain has, because has come the hour of her. When, however, she brings forth the child, no longer she remembers the tribulation, on account of the joy that has been born a man into the world. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. Also you therefore now indeed grief have. Again, however, I will see you, and will rejoice your heart, and the joy of you no one will take from you. In that day you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. And in that day of me not you will ask nothing. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you may ask the Father, he will give you in the name of me. Until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. Until now, not you have asked nothing in the name of me. Ask and you will receive, that the joy of you may be full. This sounds like the Santa Claus. That was supposed to be a pun. It was quite mourn-worthy. There is a couple of ways I could make this sort of literal. So right here, I'm thinking in terms of if uh, Jesus is talking to John and he's saying, very truly I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Um, so he's using the name Son of the Father, or Barabbas, and in the pages of the text that John writes, of course, anything that uh, he asks the Father to give um, is done for him. So that would be just the idea of if you're authoring a book, you have pretty much full control over what happens in the story. The other idea is that you could look at this kind of like a Santa Claus situation where you can ask Santa Claus for anything. Um, Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. A lot of times, people who really do ask Santa Claus for things, they don't get exactly what they wanted, but they still have a full joy at Christmas time. They don't receive exactly what they asked for, but they still receive that the joy of them may be full. So 25, though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but I will tell you plainly about my Father. So this is a part where he's saying, I've been speaking in riddles, but a time is coming when I no longer use this kind of language, or you will realize that these are riddles, and I will tell you plainly about my Father, and you can recognize that the answer to the um, Son of the Father riddles. In that day you will ask in my name, that is, I think, Barabbas. I am not saying that you will ask, that I will ask the Father on your behalf. Okay, then I will ignore that sentence then. If you're not if you're not saying something, I'll just ignore it. No, the Father himself loves you because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. The author of John's Gospel loves you because it's either you have loved the riddle or you've been tricked by the riddle and you've believed that that riddle came from God. Either you believe. So this is kind of a hint. Uh, you have believed that I came from God. He's not saying anything like I did come from God. Um, no, he's saying the author, John, loves you because you love the book he wrote, and you believe that the book he wrote came from God, not realizing that the book he wrote is the Confessions. They don't realize that the John's Gospel, the entire book of John's Gospel, is the confession of sins of Israel over the head of a scapegoat. And they don't realize that they're worshiping the scapegoat. And this guy, he loves you because you believe the scapegoat came from God. So here he is, the guy that sent the goat out into the wilderness. He says, I love you because you believe the confessions of the scapegoat came from God. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I'm leaving the world and going back to the Father. Okay, this is a bit of a stretch, but I'm imagining the book being written, and it says, I came from the Father and entered the world. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I am leaving the world and going back to the Father. So, going back to the Father, leaving the world and going back to the Father would be like if the book were destroyed and back into the mind of a person, perhaps to be rewritten at a later time. That's really a big stretch. I'm having a hard time with this part of the text, John 16:16, and that's part of the reason that I think uh, John 16:29, the disciples are being sarcastic here. They're saying, um, "Oh, now you're speaking clearly and without any figures of speech. We can see you know all things and don't even need us to ask any questions. This makes us believe that you came from God." Now um, that's a absurd concept of God, because if a God is not durable to stand up to, I mean, if you believe in, I think, the Jewish God, uh, it's the same God as the God of the atheists. So the God of the atheists, basically, some properties of that God is there is no eternal life for humanity, for any human. And I should make that distinction. There could be eternal life for humanity as a whole, but for any individual human, there's no eternal life. And God, if you worship the God of the atheists, life is largely measured by one's own personal opinion of what is good. Immoral things should be illegal and punished. Moral things should be rewarded. Helping others is held in high esteem. Harming others is frowned on. Honesty, kindness, truth, love, commitment, duty, they're all considered positive values. And of course, the opposites: falsehood, meanness, cruelty, um, falsehood? Oh, I said that already. Um, Lies, hatred, um, apathy, and breaking promises are considered negative things. Okay, but what made me start all this? The truth should hold up to all scrutiny and skepticism. And I feel like this is something that should be a property of God. There is that no matter how much you look at it, and you can look at it as much as you want, and the truth should hold up. So when Jesus' disciples say, "You do not need to have anyone ask you questions," this makes us believe that you came from God. If God can't, if God doesn't need anyone to ask any questions, if God can't hold up to any questioning, that does not make me believe it came from God. That makes me think it is falsehood. If you're making excuses for your truth, to say your truth does not need to have anyone ask questions, that sounds like an excuse to me. So do you now believe? Jesus replies, "A time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone." Indeed, the book of John is largely ignored. The verses of John, the individual verses are separated out, scattered around, each to their own homes. People take the verses of John's gospel completely out of context, and they leave those verses all alone. They don't put uh, one verse next to the other, um, because they like a few verses, but they leave most of John's Gospel all alone. Yet John's Gospel is not alone because John is still with John's Gospel. Um, John John's Gospel has told you these things so that in John's Gospel you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. John's Gospel has overcome the world. And this have overcome, I almost want to say that means John has fooled the world. Okay, now that I've done that, I think I'm going to go ahead and make another video on this gospel, or on this chapter, because I think that the riddle is based on you being the individual verses of John's gospel. That's why this goes on for so long. It's the individual verses asking, what does he mean in saying, in a little while you will see me no more? Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him. They asked him, are you asking me one another what I meant? In a little while you will see me and see me no more. It's the individual ask uh, verses saying this over and over again. The verses will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. And that is because the verses are separated, taken out of context. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, but when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So there is going to be a lot of, individual verses from John's Gospel taken out of context, bring a lot of joy. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take it away. No one will take away your joy. In that day, you will no longer ask me anything, because the verses are taken out of context, so they don't ask anything in the full book. Very truly, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Indeed, none of the verses uh, mention Barabbas. And when the first verse that does ask for anything in Barabbas' name is right here, John 18:40. Give us Barabbas. Until now, none of the verses of this book have asked for anything in the name of Barabbas. Ask, and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. So what John's Gospel is, it's an answer to give us Barabbas, give us the Son of the Father. So I'm not sure if I have that much to add at this point, so I probably will go on to chapter 17. But yeah, I think that the answer to this riddle is made clear when you realize that he is talking, or the book is talking to the individual verses of the Bible. And he's talking about keeping all of the verses together. He's talking about verses being taken out of context, verses being changed, um, verses keep repeating the same question, verses being scattered, taken out of context. And finally, an upcoming verse that specifically asks for the name, give us Barabbas. Until now, the verses have not asked for anything in the name Barabbas. ask for Barabbas, and you'll realize that John's gospel is Barabbas.